Everybody. I will propose we amend the agenda to do police next, followed by Parks and Rec. Is there anyone who would want to make that motion? Police and then Parks and Rec.
Second.
Who so moved? I'm sorry.
Sean.
Want to be, okay,
Oh, there.
good. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Can I ask Interim Chief Bolter to come on up? Thanks. Sorry.
Fine. Sorry.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So this slideshow includes three different proposed budgets, one for the police department, one for animal control, and one for civil preparedness. There are 48 full-time employees in this proposed budget for the police department at $4,809,371, a 3.1% increase from this current year. So those full-time employees make up our sworn officers, which there are 38, a group of civilian, which includes records personnel and a secretary, and then 7 full-time dispatchers. The animal control proposed budget is $70,581, a 5.5% increase, and there is one full-time employee there, and I'm sure everybody knows we have the best animal control officer in the state, Mark Rudowitz.
Mark?
And the civil preparedness proposed budget, there are no full-time employees there, and there's a 0% increase in that proposed budget. For the services and programs, and it relates to all three of those proposed budgets, criminal emergencies, non-emergencies, investigations, and just some examples. For criminal emergencies, domestic violence and assaults, non-emergencies that are criminal, like a shoplifting is an example, and then criminal investigations like burglary and identity theft. For medical emergencies, again, some examples there are heart attacks, seizures, and drug overdoses, and some non-emergencies that are medical related are strains, falls where there really aren't much injuries. And there's a large variety of services and programs that fall into the crime prevention, public safety, enforcement, compliance, and education that really encompasses a lot, or most of what we do. Some areas of focus. So for professional development for the upcoming year, my goal is to provide opportunities for professional growth throughout the ranks and assignments, to not only provide the best service to the community from our members, but to prepare them for future positions, assignments, and promotions. So really kind of a focus on, we have a large group of people, 48 full-time employees, how can we prepare them for next year, for the year after, for 5 years, for 10 years down the road. Another area of focus for this budget is to strengthen our quality assurance. So this budget will allow us to establish regular supervisory meetings, which will create some divisional accountability. So we've had some difficulty with getting sort of all of our sergeants together and the divisions together. So we've put into this budget a little bit more overtime to allow that to happen. For people to come together for some consistent department-wide interpretation of our department mission and our policies, and to create a more effective means of communicating within. For personal safety and operational improvements, we want to evaluate our procedures and our tools that are available that involve incidents of high risk and high liability and personal injury. So we respond to a lot of types of calls for service that fall within that, and we train for a lot of things that may come our way. So we really want to take a look at those and evaluate our procedures and see how maybe we can do some things or plan for things a little bit better. Trust and legitimacy, obviously a very important thing for the police department to have within the community. We want to continue building our trust and legitimacy by developing and maintaining relationships, to listening to people, to creating dialogue, practicing the open door policies and concepts that we have, and through our various methods of communications. We're going to maintain our services, equipment, and resources. This budget will allow us to maintain these, our current level of service, and the equipment and resources that we need to maintain our community policing style. And then finally, an area of focus is to maintain our programs. And some of our most popular ones up there is the Citizens Police Academy as well as the Junior Police Academy. But the budget will also allow us to continue with these highly successful programs that is designed to educate, to promote compliance, cooperation, and community, to break down barriers and build meaningful relationships, and for the police department and the police officers to be recognized as problem solvers, a resource, and guardians for the community. Some of the highlights for the budget: a total of $22,800 was restored to this proposed budget from areas that were funded this current year, but through a revenue fund. Ammunition, taser supplies, soft body armor, vehicle maintenance. Those are all line items that were put back into this proposed budget with the regular funding. The last fiscal year and this current fiscal year have been extremely challenging for the department in regards to overtime. And they were mostly caused by vacancies that we had and for non-work related injuries. So we had roughly 4 vacancies since January 2017. And what we have found over the years is when we have 2 vacancies, it really starts to hit our overtime budget. And we have to start moving some people around. So we are expecting a similar situation in the upcoming year. We are expecting a couple retirements. And if we are to hire somebody who is not certified, the process is roughly 9 to 10 months from when they get hired to when they're on the road by themselves. So we are expecting, a considerable amount of next year being in a similar situation where we are now. Because of our minimum staffing and because of our obligations for public safety, we want to make sure there are enough police officers out there, so we make sure that we fill those spots, and that's filled often by overtime.
Yeah.
Just jump in quickly. So this was an area where we took a look. I moved that for lunch, thank you. This was an area that we took a look at our historical spending versus budget. And it's an area that appears that we have, again, historically been under budgeting. So we had that issue where, again, we might have a systemic budgeting problem to address. But secondly, when we sort of get to what is that magic number where we start dipping into overtime, well, it's really if we have 3 or more vacancies for whatever reason. That could be retirements, that could be somebody's away at the academy, that could be a workers' comp injury, that could be a medical leave. But based on anticipated number of retirements, we felt that there is a very good probability in the upcoming fiscal year that we're going to be above those 2 people out to the point where it's going to start really hitting the overtime budget. So that was an attempt to really sort of address both the historical under-budgeting as well as the anticipated vacancies we're assuming for the upcoming year.
This is just for my education. Do we have an overtime strategy? And by that I mean, overtime can be a tool to actually, save us money, but if it's not used appropriately, it could end up costing more. So I'm just curious if we have a philosophy on what's the right balance.
So we sort of first have to look at what our minimum staffing requirements are for the patrol division out on the road. So right now we have a 3 officer and 1 supervisor minimum on 2 shifts. And then the 3rd shift is similar to that, except at 1 period for 4 hours, they can go down 1. So in order to have enough people to staff each shift, we're really looking at a total of 7 to 8 officers to be able to schedule 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So sometimes we have more than 3 working, and sometimes we have just the minimum of 3 working and a supervisor. So in breaking down, what our overtime is, we kind of look at, how many hours of overtime, because it's very hard to predict for a precise amount of how much overtime we're going to need year to year. But we'll take a look at what has each year been historically, and we have gone down considerably the last 3 years in the amount of overtime hours. Now, the officers do have the option of taking pay for their overtime or compensatory time, up to a certain amount. They're allowed to go up to 80 hours. They can bank that. And sometimes that comes back around in favor of us not spending more money and filling their position, and sometimes we just have to pay money to fill that when they take.
Sure.
But the philosophy really has been the last 5 years, it's stayed the same. The amount of overtime that has been budgeted has stayed the same, regardless of the increase in wages or the increase in the need.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of philosophy to overtime, in terms of how much overtime is too much for a particular officer to bear, there's a couple of things that you have to start thinking about. Officer safety, so that's a concern in terms of overscheduling overtime. And then if and when we get to the point where we're ordering people to do overtime shifts, that's usually a sign that it's going to start wearing on sort of the mental health and well-being of the officers when we're having to order folks in. And how often would you say we do that here?
For order-ins?
Yeah.
Order-ins don't happen that often because there's really not, if you talk to the officers, there's not a whole lot of overtime opportunities here. But if I was to guess, it's probably about 5% or 10% of our overtime is order-ins.
Okay.
So that would be a last minute, somebody called out sick on the midnight shift and it was 2 hours before they had to come in.
Yep.
And now nobody really wants to stay, so somebody gets ordered for that.
Yeah. Appreciate the
But there are
conversation.
there are other overtime opportunities that we need to staff out on the road that are not paid through the budget. A road job is manned by us, a construction job, something like that. And that starts to take a toll on the amount of hours that the officers can or should work as well. So we really try to keep that, and there's a contractual obligation there that they can't be forced for more than basically three overtimes in a row.
Okay.
We don't often get to that, but when we start getting our numbers down, it starts to take a toll on them. And I'll explain a little bit later on what we did this last fall to try to compensate or mitigate those overtime.
Great, thank you.
So there are two categories or two line items that address overtime. One is regular overtime and one is training overtime. And historically, we have not used all of the money in the training overtime. For that, we've been able to sort of offset some of the other overtime expenses with that account. So taking a real close look at it this year, we basically decreased the overtime training account to a more reasonable number to fit in that category and requested more money for our overtime account. So they offset each other a little bit, but overall, there's an increase to the proposed budget of $19,367 or 9% for overtime. One other highlight in there is just a coding correction, and Maria had spoke to it earlier today. Just about $1,400 that was placed in one line item that really should be placed in another. It doesn't affect the overall budget. The numbers are still the same.
So uniform allowance and is a new line in the police department budget that used to be under collective bargaining along with the education stipend, but we just pulled it out in order to show, just to be a little more transparent about that. So that's a new line there. When we pulled it out, we didn't do the number exactly correct, so that's why that's a correction we need to do.
Okay, so moving on to trends and challenges. So as mentioned, staffing levels and overtime has been a challenge. Basically, since January 2017, it's really been an issue for us. We made some adjustments last fall. So we have a traffic enforcement officer, Gary Gray, who's been doing a fantastic job at that for many years now. And we pulled him from that assignment in the fall to supplement patrol because that's where we were running into a lot of overtime with the 4 vacancies. So that worked okay for us, but then we saw that there was still another need. So a month later, we moved, there were actually 5 members of the department who work inside detectives, community services, and accreditation, and they said that they were more than willing to do a 2-week rotational period out on patrol from their responsibilities. So we figured 2 weeks weren't a lot of time to take away from their assignments, enough to manage it, and so that helped out also. So it did help out in that sense, but we now haven't had Gary on the road for over 6 months as a traffic enforcement officer, so we've definitely seen the impact of that. We have more complaints about motor vehicle-related activity, and we're just not able to respond to the level that we want to. We have stopped the rotation from the other officers, the voluntary rotation, because we were able to get one of our officers out of the academy successfully, and he successfully completed our field training program. So we're now down at just 2 spots right now. We have one person in the academy, one person who is finishing up his field training, and that should finish up in the next 2 weeks. So we should look okay until these other pending departures come. Okay, so medical calls, and as Kristen and the group had talked about earlier, opioid overdoses are a significant concern for us. Just to give you some numbers, in 2016, we had 5 known heroin overdoses in Simsbury. 1 was fatal, and our officers saved 4 of those lives with Narcan. 2017, the number went up to 8, and there was 1 fatality of that, but our officers saved 7 of those lives with Narcan. 2018 to date, so just 3 months in, we've had 3 known heroin overdoses. Luckily, none of those were fatal, and one of them we were able to save with Narcan. The other ones, they either didn't need Narcan or the ambulance service provided that Narcan. And I will get together with Kristen, who had mentioned earlier before she left, but we have been actively working to prevent these overdoses with education, training, enforcement, and then most recently looking for treatment options and how we can get involved with those treatment options. So I'll connect with Kristen, but there are several ideas out there for getting people beds and places that they can go. And instead of just, viewing the police as the ones who will arrest them, giving them basically that ticket to a bed to get some treatment. Because that's the biggest complaint that we see, is that there are no services for people. They try a 30-day program, a 60-day program, a 90-day program, non-residential program, and they're just exposed to the opportunities all around them. So we did find one through the Salvation Army. It's called ARC. It's right on Homestead Avenue in Hartford. So we're working with them on at least doing some firsthand referrals to them and trying to help people get in for treatment.
Chief, can you just say that again? Those are heroin overdoses in Simsbury, correct?
Heroin overdoses in Simsbury.
Not to be dramatic, but that's
To find a point on
to
it?
the perception of what this community does and doesn't have. That's
here.
That's right here. That's 16 heroin overdoses in the last 24 months in
Right.
this community.
That's just the overdoses.
That's just the overdoses. That's just the ones we know about because somebody did or almost passed away as a result of that.
Right. And so, nationwide, what we are seeing is it's not just heroin.
Right.
A lot of it is prescription. A lot of it has started with prescription. And some of these people, it started with prescription drugs as
Right.
well. And you're right, those are just the overdoses. We don't know about the other ones who are just barely maintaining, just hanging in there. And a couple of these have been repeats, same person.
The Community for Care very much appreciates your department's participation
Thank you.
in our programs. And I know 2 of your officers are going to be at the program this coming Wednesday.
Yes.
Actually demonstrating paraphernalia that's available to children,
Yeah, for
how
vaping.
it's used, what
Yeah.
parents should look for. I know I'm giving a plug here, but I'm,
It's a good plug.
It's an important part.
it's important, and you guys do a great job, both staffing our committee meetings and actually participating in our panel discussions. Lieutenant Fred has, gone to people's houses and said, look, this is where your kids are going to hide it. This is what happens, in your medicine cabinet. And it's just practical information like that that's so helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. Right along with medical calls, for years, we've seen a slow increase, the number of calls that we go on every year for just general medical calls, and we're still continuing to see that, even with the closure of the walk-in at Dorset Crossing. We're still seeing, we're still projecting every year it's going over. So we're guessing about 100 more calls for service next year for medicals. And so it is a significant cost to that. We provide oxygen, we're first responders, we provide all types of medical emergency equipment. And that gets more expensive every single year. But this budget will take care of it for next year. Another sort of a trend that we've seen is the motor vehicle thefts and thefts from vehicles. So historically, we've had, rashes of thefts from inside vehicles over the years. Usually happens in the spring, the summer, not so often the fall. We generally attribute that to kids or young adults, and it pops up in neighborhoods here and there. But over the last year, we've seen something very different. We've seen an increase of car thefts. So we'll have anywhere from 3 to 5 cars stolen each year. Sometimes one was taken without the permission as opposed to a true theft. But since February of last year, we've had 19 cars stolen from Simsbury. Every single car has been unlocked. Every single car has had keys left in it or a key fob in it. And we've had this discussion, with the board and us, and putting that message out there. That message is definitely out there, and it's not just from the town of Simsbury. It's out there on the news from all other communities. But we're still not really getting anywhere with that. So a lot of problems come out of just somebody's car being stolen, the impact on them. Other people's cars are being broken into. So what these people are doing, they're generally young adults to kids without licenses. And we just had one a couple nights ago where they come into town, they run around a neighborhood, and they're going through cars that are unlocked, and they're taking whatever they can. When they come across a key fob or set of keys, they take the car. They'll use the car for a couple days. They'll go on joyrides. They'll go to McDonald's. They'll show off if it's a nice fancy car for them, or they'll sell it to somebody for $100 to use for whatever. They don't care. Then it's found dumped in Hartford, New Britain, Waterbury. We've had one found in Long Island. We had one in Bridgeport, a couple in Springfield. And then what's happening with these is people are getting in crashes. And we were linked to one crash 2 weeks ago in Hartford and West Hartford. So a car was stolen from town here, pursuit engaged in another town or an attempt to stop the vehicle, and the vehicle crashed, and there were injuries. So this is happening much more often, and not just with our cars, but with cars throughout the state. So our detectives are trying to keep up on this as far as the information that's available. Our officers spent 4 hours in Hartford the other night when we had that one incident where cars were being broken into here in town. It wasn't a car stolen, but then they fled in a stolen car from another town to try to identify suspects and try to stop this. So again, this budget will help us with some of that, but it sort of speaks to a bit of the overtime too. It's quite a challenge, if we're not getting, as much cooperation as we could or should from the public as far as locking their belongings. We have to then put some more people out there, some more personnel out there, which is very difficult to do because they don't happen every night. They don't happen in the same neighborhood. It's very random. We have maps of where they happen all over the town, and they're all over. So.
That's particularly troubling, 19, because the keys were in the car.
19.
amazing?
Yeah,
Can we publish the names of the owners of those cars?
I'm being somewhat flip here, but is that really car theft or car borrowing? Because if you're dumb enough to leave your keys in your car, I mean,
Yeah.
that's just
Well,
insane.
I think it's been very common for a lot of people to do that, depending on either where you grew up, your age, whatever it may be. I think we're finding it's very common for people to do that.
It's really unfortunate.
Yeah, it is. Not a single car, and I hope this doesn't change, but not a single car has been broken into. There wasn't a broken window, nothing.
Yeah.
So even the cars that aren't stolen, people are just leaving them unlocked. And I get it, it's your own personal property. You can leave your car unlocked, it's on your own private property, you should feel safe. But the reality of this is people are coming here to do this. So I think we all kind of have to work together on that. And then one other trend or challenge to us, always one of our largest priorities is safety on our roadways. So, without having our traffic enforcement officer out there this last 6 months, it's been a bit of a challenge, and we've had to pull him before in years past. Our other officers are still doing traffic enforcement, but that's in between the medical calls and the other calls for service that they're handling. But it's one of our largest priorities because they often lead to injury. So we want to prevent as many accidents as we can. I think, I don't want to take full credit for it, but I think that we're doing a good job. In 2016, we had 461 accidents that we investigated. And then in 2017, we had 386, so a 17% decrease on that. Our motor vehicle accidents with injuries also decreased, 102 in 2016 to 71 in 2017, so a 30% decrease. And I want to attribute this to, some of our education campaigns, some of the things that we do in the schools. We sponsor events where kids learn about distracted driving, and they get to sit in simulators and see what it's like. They're forced to text while they're driving, and they're going off the road in a simulator. But also, we've had a more focused approach. We've tracked for years where our accidents are happening, and we've looked at those areas for engineering efforts, enforcement, redesign, something. And we focus more on those intersections for enforcement. And so those numbers are coming down. So we hope that's a trend that we're going to keep seeing.
Do you ever make those simulators available for adults?
We don't have those, but you know what? I'm sure if we get them again this year at the school,
Because I think
yeah.
it's not just the kids.
Oh, no, it's definitely not.
I know.
Particularly the moms and dads that drive SUVs. Yes.
Exactly.
You guys still do the old accidents lead?
No.
You don't have the accidents?
With the seatbelt?
Yeah, at the high
You're
school.
dating yourself now, Chris.
No. You know what? We had a lot
We
of
used to do it at the old library, actually.
mixed feedback on that, because that was pretty jaunting to a
It was
body.
awesome. Yeah, that-
Yeah, that was,
liability now.
that was the state police unit, and they would come around
It
and
was,
and
it
do
was
that.
effective.
Yeah.
That's
why you're so tall, Chris.
I will, just a quick question, so this education, so metrics, your metrics in here that, I won't say who in the Peterson household in 15 and 16 was part of that 3,900 stops. But, so we're down to 34 is budget, that's directly because Gary, is that one of the contributors why your budget's so much lower? Is a person like Gary's off the road in enforcements?
I'm sorry, what was the
So
question?
you've got a budget here of 3,400 traffic stops instead. That's significantly down from 3 years ago. Is that because,
No, actually, it's not. We originally thought that our numbers were going to start going down because Gary was off of the road. All the other officers make stops as well. And in true Gary tradition, he continues to make as many stops as he possibly can.
oh yeah, he knows my
While he's
license
doing,
by heart.
while he's doing everything else. So the number has not gone down for that. It has over the years fluctuated. It depends on, what responsibilities the officers have. So what we have seen for years, and this was one of the reasons why we had the additional 2 officers put on 2 years ago, is the investigations themselves are much more lengthy, much longer investigations. So you go and you try to handle a fraud investigation when you're assigned to a district, and you may be with somebody for half an hour, you may be with them for 2 or 3 hours, trying to figure out actually how this happened. And especially fraud, it's one of those very difficult investigations where almost all the time we don't figure out what happened, or we don't find a suspect because it happens from out of state, out of country, or through, all these mechanisms that we just can't track down and nobody can track down. But we try to get, to the bottom of those things. So I think the officer's time is being used elsewhere. Their amount of free time, so the time to patrol, the time to just drive around your neighborhood and through your businesses, on days and on evenings, diminishes and diminishes and diminishes because they're so busy with other things. We have also increased the amount of activities that we're involved in, a lot of meetings that we go to, which again then takes officers off the road. We did have, we lost the part-time police clerk last year, and the person who was in that had retired the year before that, and we hadn't filled it. That position used to allow the officers to remain on the road a bit, because that position did 600 fingerprints a year for permits, for pistol permits, for securities and exchange, for adoption, all sorts of things. And now we have a district car come in. So that district car is coming in several times a day, come in, do the paperwork, fingerprint a person, then go back out. So we have seen a decrease, I think, for many reasons in car stops, not because of Gary. He's probably stayed about the same.
Just following you.
So as far as our CNR projects, there are not many of those. We're looking to replace 3 of our cruisers. This is the purchase and outfitting of 3 cruisers to replace 3 that are now on the road. This allows us to keep our fleet in good, safe operating condition. The Highway Department does a fantastic job keeping our vehicles up in good condition. They get inspected every single week. But either way, 75,000 miles on a police car is not 75,000 miles on your own car, at least it shouldn't be. You should not be driving your car as we may have to drive our police cars at times. The engines are running quite frequently. You may see the engines running here and other places. We carry Narcan in those cars, and they have to stay between 59 degrees and 87 degrees Fahrenheit. The only way to keep those in that temperature range is to keep the car running. So we've looked at many different ways to try to insulate that and prevent, us just keeping the cars running, but we can't. So if the cars are not being used, the Narcan comes in. We transport that in and out, but, you're in and out of your car 20 times a day, you can't be taking that in and out with you. So 75,000 miles on a car, just for example, is a lot of wear on that engine because it's running all the time and because of the hard driving that we do for a lot of those emergencies. Second request is for a replacement of our AEDs, our automatic external defibrillators. So we've had those since at least 2000, and each time, the majority of those were donated by civic groups. So we're looking to replace 8 of those now and add 1 to our fleet. We did replace 2 at the beginning of this year with some funds that we had. We have sought some grant opportunities for that, and hopefully we do have 1 coming through that will cover maybe half of an AED. And we do have some other civic groups that have reached out to us. And I know that they like to, when they donate, to donate to something like this because there's a direct impact on helping somebody's life. And we use these on a very regular basis. I walked in this morning at 7:30, and there was 1 sitting outside of our records division, and that means that we used it last night.
wow.
Because it has to be downloaded. All that information on there that was used last night is downloaded, and we keep track of that to show what we did, when it was turned on, how it was used, did it provide a shock to a person, did it not, was there a heartbeat, all sorts of things like that. So they're past their life expectancy right now. We don't have any problems with them, but we also don't want to mess around with those. 1 will be in each cruiser. So right now, our additional 1 is to add 1 to our community services officer. And right now, our community service officer, Lauren Devon, spends a significant amount of time, maybe with a population that would be more likely to have a medical emergency. So we'd like to get 1 in her car as well. And the third and final CNR project is radio system feasibility study. It's a $40,000 request to fund an evaluation and analysis of our public safety radio system to prepare for some system upgrades or replacements. We currently have a system that's like most towns around us that are sort of piecemealed. It's 20-plus years old, most of the parts. Over time, trees grow, our scapes change, our coverage has decreased significantly. So especially in the southern part of our town, we're having difficulty with clear radio transmissions, both on a portable radio and from a car radio. And then most recently, we've had a lot of interference that we can't figure out where it's coming from. So historically, in certain times of the year, we would get what we call skips, and you can hear, it's like a public works that's on our same frequency down in West Haven, and occasionally you would hear them. But it never really, interrupted our service. Now we're getting something very different. So we're trying to track that down and figure it out. And unfortunately, it's a sign of where our radio system is. So definitely an area that we need to work on. I was at a meeting yesterday, a regional meeting yesterday, to see what the other towns are doing, to look at some options. So I think this is very important for us to do, to see if, what we may need down the line. And just to throw a number out there, it could be anywhere from $500,000 to, like Bloomfield has a $4 million project that they're looking at. And unfortunately, these are basically 10-year projects, if you talk to anybody, just like computers, just like all technology, it's basically a 10-year resource. Now, we've been able to stretch ours out significantly, and we can replace some parts. We could replace a part in Terraflow for $60,000, but all that will do is give us a new microwave. It won't increase our coverage, and it won't get rid of the interference. So it will sort of keep us where we are now, but that part down there is not serviceable, have to be replaced. So I think this is an integral part of maintaining our radio communication system. That's it.
If I could just jump in.
Yeah, Maria.
On the radio system feasibility study, I felt that was very important to include because speaking with some of our area neighbors who are further along in this process than we are, we're seeing price tags in the neighborhood of $3 to $4 million when a complete system refurbishment is needed. And that's such a large amount of money. We would obviously need to bond for that. And in speaking with the chief about that, it's such a large number. I don't want us to get a surprise where, oh my goodness, we have this imminent need. We have to expedite this project. And oh, by the way, we need $3 to $4 million. So I think getting on top of it now, and if we can start phase one, there is a phase two of the feasibility study, but at least get phase one underway, start this process, get a good handle on what are the needs, what are the potential costs going to be, so we can adequately prepare and plan for that future cost, because again, it's such a large ticket item. I just don't want us to get caught by surprise by that amount in a few years.
Based on what you know at this point, are there opportunities, do you think, to possibly work with other towns that are at the same phase as we are?
I do. So a few towns out our way, including Granby and Canton, we have not initiated the feasibility study piece. John Ward, who's the town manager in Granby, did reach out to me. We've also spoken with Lyle Ray at CROG, and there's a staff member at CROG who does have some expertise in this particular area. They've offered, if we decide that we want to proceed with this, that they could run the RFQ process for us, which is a great resource. So I think that there's some potential there for utilizing CROG and their resources, at least for managing the RFQ process, but then potentially, if there was maybe a particular vendor that, let's say maybe us and Granby were both interested in working in, perhaps with some purchasing power, maybe negotiating a slightly better rate on the study.
Do these types of events ever fall under any sort of assistance at all from any organization, the federal or state level or not? I know we're always going back to the state well, but have you ever heard of that or not?
I'm not familiar with
I'm hesitant to bring it up, but regional dispatch, with their big push to regional dispatch, they probably will not be looking at funding anybody who's not doing
Localized.
regional dispatch. And we've looked at that several times, and it's a very different animal. So I haven't heard of any. I know that when we redid our communications center in 2005, I don't believe we received any grant assistance for it at that time, but I'm not sure. We may be in a better position, and I think a study would show that, than maybe the other towns are, because we have a new CLMP tower that we use in Bloomfield that does a pretty good job over there, and we have fire department has radio systems throughout town. They have a good working system, and so there may be a way to work together with towers. I don't think we would be looking at necessarily having to put new towers up, which is a huge expense. We put a new one up here within the last 5 years at Central School that the town owns. So I think that we would be in a better position than maybe where Bloomfield is, but I don't know exactly where they are.
And Nick, one of the other things that when you look at towers, having served in both the fire department and now the police department, is it's not only the money, it's the opposition you can get from putting a tower in somebody's neighborhood. It can take a lot of time. So we're in pretty good shape in this town between the fire department and the police department.
Yeah, I think so. So I don't think the outlook is necessarily what some of the other towns may have, but, I think a study would show us.
Any other questions for Nick?
Just one quick one. The defibrillators, aren't there some mounted in buildings also, or,
There's one right in here. Yeah.
and who
there's-
maintains those?
Who gets what?
How do those get maintained, do you know? Or those don't fall under your?
They don't fall under us, but we do order the parts for those.
You do?
Yep. we do, the pads for those.
So part of your,
Not through our budget, no.
oh, okay.
No.
That's what I was wondering.
Only
Because I
because
know
we're-
there are some in
No, only
different
because
buildings.
we end up ordering most of the medical supplies for,
Right.
you know, for us, we do, and so we also have supported those, but not out of our budget. We have a very different AEDs, so those in all the public buildings in town
Right.
are designed for somebody who is not trained to use those, like one you would see at an airport, where you
Right.
press a button and it talks you through it, so anybody could use one of those. Ours are different.
Okay.
So you have to be trained to use ours, and ours match up with the equipment that the ambulance service uses. So we wanted to make sure that they were compatible. So when we put the pads on a person, and we're using our defibrillator, and then a paramedic shows up, they don't have to take those pads off. They just connect right up to it because we're using compatible systems.
Any other
So
questions?
if that happens in this building, then when the paramedics come, they have to switch over?
Or us, we would be switching.
Or you would switch
Yep.
over? Interesting. Thank you. Sorry.
Mike and then Sean?
So, Nick, I wanted to thank you from the Juvenile Review Board. The department's help in that area has been a good thing, and I do appreciate it. Something to look at when you're doing the radio for the town is we actually redid a radio system for my company. We ended up getting cell phones. Believe it or not, they have a radio set up, so.
That was the
look at
meeting I was at yesterday.
Okay.
Through a company called FirstNet. I don't know if you've heard of FirstNet. It's designed for emergency services. And they said yesterday that their product is not ready yet for that. It would work, but not for what they call a critical mission. So it would work for non-critical. So they are sort of advertising it and promoting it for those who, maybe in my position, who don't necessarily need to listen to that radio all the time or carry that radio. And it's a cell phone that works in the same manner.
This works off a different frequency, but I'll
Yeah.
share the information, Lorraine.
Great, thank you.
With respect to capital and obviously staring down somewhere between $1 million and $4 million bogey, we don't have that on the capital plan at this time, and given the decisions we're potentially making this afternoon, we either need to make a motion to get it on there now with some sort of placeholder, or in sooner rather than later, get a placeholder on there, because, again, $4 million is not out of the realm of budget, but it does have bonding implication, it does have capacity implications for decisions we make today, and the capacity we do or don't have tomorrow. So, again, not looking for an answer right now on what it would cost, but we probably would want to expedite at least a rough number. It's going to be between 2 and 3, or between 3 and 5, or,
Yeah.
something.
Sean, are you keeping track of the parking lot items? 'Cause- Okay, cool. So maybe, yeah, the wish list, whatever we're calling it. All right.
And I apologize, I didn't see it in your metrics, but if we take, piggybacking the concept of a significant budget issue going forward potentially, if you take the vacancies you have now, think about full complement, take the vacancies now, and you add to those the retirements, how short are we of full complement?
So those 4 vacancies that we had, they're slowly fading away. So we have one person who's in the academy right now, and he will not be on the road by himself until early fall. He will be graduating this March, so probably looking at July, August, so maybe late summer. We have one person who's finishing up his field training right now. He will be done in less than 2 weeks. So we're really only, if you look at the actual numbers, we're really only shy Chief Ingridson right now, as far as hiring. But on the road and being able to contribute, we are shy 3. So, so Chief Ingridson, one who is in the academy, and one who it will be coming out in 2 weeks. Yeah, so we'll be down to 2 pretty soon. We are in the process of going through the selection process for a new officer. Not that we're going to be hiring yet, but we're starting that. We have a good list that we had started last November is when that closing ended. So we did some interviews about 2 weeks ago. And with these potential retirees, we don't know if they're going to actually retire or not. Pretty confident that one will by August. The other one, it's very likely. So, if we're able to have an active list, we'll still end up being down 3, potentially 4, for a portion of next fiscal year. We won't be unless something else happens, we won't be any more than that.
And I also, just, go ahead, Jim, sorry.
Can you just explain, I'm not sure that everybody knows the difference when we hire somebody from another department?
Yeah, who's certified, trained.
Yeah, so that can
Cost
shorten that.
implication,
Yeah.
sure, absolutely.
Right.
Right.
And that's,
Sometimes it's better to have a new fresh.
Absolutely.
Cost, too.
Yeah.
and that's where we are right now. Joe Halt was hired in January, and he came from New Britain, 11 years on in New Britain. So he'll be wrapping up after about a 6 or so week training period with us, because he came with some significant experience.
And I just want to say that I can just, from a personal standpoint, my family, my children, and other communities at the schools, they welcome the appearance and the presence of the police anytime they're on the schools. So as much as you can stop pulling me over for whatever you're doing and keep, the traffic stops was
Transfer
employed
that,
because the people are at the school, I appreciate that.
Thank you,
That's
thank you.
it.
That-
Nice, you finally came clean on that.
Yeah.
I
Forgive me,
think that,
Full transparency.
that SRO program, so one in the high school and one
That's
in the
great.
middle school, and then also to the other schools, as well as, maybe the change in service philosophy over the last 18 years has really impacted our relationship, and we hear more and more of that, and that's really on the side of what we hear every single day. And it's funny, when you talk about officers coming here from other departments, one said to me 2 years ago, he's not used to people waving at him, he's used to them doing another gesture. And that was
Fewer
just-
fingers.
Yeah, fewer fingers.
I just, again, I spend a lot of time in my children's school, and I cannot tell you how I feel when I pull up in the morning. I pull up at random times or whichever, I pull into school to go in there, and I see an officer either there or just in the neighborhood. I feel so much different about, my family.
Thank you. Thank you.
I know a few years ago, you had as part of your presentation, how many officers per 1,000 people were recommended?
Yes.
There was some national standard on that.
Yes,
How far off are we on that? I mean, where do we fall on that now?
5 officers off.
We're 5
So,
off.
yeah, so we're at about 1.5 per 1,000 officers per 1,000. The Connecticut rate is 1.8.
Right.
So for us to get to 1.8, we would need 43 officers. So we're at 1.5. Avon, I think, is 1.6. I think Granby is 1.5. The national average is a bit higher. The New England average is higher. National, I think it's 2.3. So we're considerably lower than Connecticut's average. We're right about in the middle for this region as far as average, because you sort of have some anomalies, like Canton and Granby, where they're significantly smaller communities and significantly smaller police departments. But, like I said, it would take 5 officers for us to get up to it's 1.7 something at that point. But I would hesitate to just look at those.
I was just curious
Rates.
to see how
Yeah,
how
because-
we're moving on that
Yeah,
scale.
because, I mean, if you had a community that was the same size as Simsbury, but had a significantly higher crime rate or a much different need, then maybe that number should be to that 1.8. We're very fortunate here that we have a very low crime rate, and a lot of our work is geared towards prevention and education and compliance. But what happens with that 1.5 rate that we have is when something does come in, we need to drop some other things and make time for that. And so that's what we were seeing with the detective division a couple years ago, looking for 2 more officers to help support a 3rd detective in there on a full-time basis, was because, when those rash of car break-ins would happen, or burglaries, that one year, the burglaries went way up. Everything else that we were doing kind of went by the side, and we don't want that to go by the side. We don't want those community programs to go by the side, so, but it's
And as-
manageable.
As we hear those population numbers from Jamie,
Yeah,
do you have additional concerns about that?
I think that'll be a discussion for next year.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sean, do you have a question?
Not to bring up a darker topic, but in conjunction with the Board of Ed, I mean, we gave a hard look, and I think the Police Department and the Board of Ed did a fantastic job years ago in light of some particularly sad and tragic events of reevaluating school safety and putting in additional measures. Every year, unfortunately, we learn more and the circumstances change. do we need to do that again? Not only from a staffing standpoint, that's where the SRO came from, but also additional funding for the schools. And again, don't have to answer that now, but is that something we should be also looking at,
Yes.
looking at in the shorter term?
Yes, we should be looking at that, and we are in discussions with the superintendent's office about that. And, also at the level of the SRO, having those discussions with staff at specific schools.
Okay.
And, we do a lot of training, not just our department, but town-wide. So the, Kevin Kowalski as the EMD, along with the fire department and the ambulance service, we have trained together significantly, and we will continue to.
If you anticipate a strategic change in how you police the schools, when would you expect that you'd put a collaborative recommendation with the Board of Education together? Is that something we might hear in 6 months, 18 months, 36 months? What do you think?
Yeah, I would say you'd start hearing about it in the next 6 months, because we're at that point where we're just discussing what are our potential options? What do we think that the community expectations are? What do we think that, our individual expectations are, whether it's the police department or the Board of Education or the superintendent's office or a particular school? What are those needs? So we're going through that now. I know the school just had finished up their security survey that they did. And so that's part of the discussion now as well. And every time a new event comes up, unfortunately, we take a look at it from a slightly different point of view.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have to learn.
Chief, we also need to consider that there are private schools in this town as
Yep.
well, so
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
I would just add on to that, we have the benefit and the beauty of a facility that can hold 10,000 plus people. And obviously the PAC is responsible for that, but we're ultimately the overseer of that. And I know we've trained and drilled
Yes.
for that as well, but there are additional considerations. I mean, 3,500 people go through the library on a Saturday. That's a beautiful, wonderful thing, but that adds additional challenges for your department, and for the other public safety officers in this town to consider. It's not just our schools. Those are obviously our primary, but, we've got pools, we've got golf courses, we've got community centers, we've got senior centers, we have the best library in the state, so that does put a strain on your resources as well.
It does, yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Chief.
thank you.
Thanks, Chief.
Next, Jerry, please. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank you for the flexibility you afforded me with the scheduling of the hearing as well. Much appreciated. With me today is John Tebow, our Recreation Supervisor. Get started, as most of you know, we are somewhat unique, and we have two budgets that we operate, our general fund budget and our special revenue fund, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about both. Our general fund budget this year is coming in proposed at $804,422, or a 3.4% increase. Both funds, the department with both funds combined includes 17 full-time employees. The breakdown there, and obviously our major areas of responsibilities, our park maintenance operation, which has 9 full-time employees. Our golf maintenance operation has 4 full-time, and we have 4 remaining administrative staff, myself, 2 recreation supervisors, and an administrative secretary. Major services and programs, we maintain 535 acres of parks and open space, parks and 2,500 acres of open space, including the Farmington Valley Greenway. We operate, maintain, and program for the 235-acre Simsbury Farms Recreation Complex. And beyond that, we provide and programs and services for all ages and abilities in the community. Our areas of focus for the upcoming year, and I believe it's probably repeated again in this presentation, is to initiate the process to move forward with the Park and Open Space Master Plan. And the Open Space Master Plan funding has been set aside for that. We've had numerous discussions internally, as well as with the Park and Rec Commission, about the importance of our parks and facilities being included in that master plan. In all cases, our parks are contiguous to open space areas, and in many cases, now with the Greenway, we actually have trails that go through park or adjacent to parks through open space onto town roads and sometimes back to open space areas. So, so Jamie Rabbit, listening to his presentation, made a point that kind of drove home with me. We're looking at a time when our population is really going to have a significant increase, or is projected to. The last time a master plan was done was close to 50 years ago. It was actually recommended when the Simsbury Farms complex was recommended. So needless to say that the town and our park system has undergone tremendous changes since then, and it looks like, really the complexion of the town can change, even more in the coming year. So I think given that, I think the timing is good. One of the big pieces of this will be public input. We work closely with all our many organizations in town, particularly park and open space related organizations. So I think the timing is appropriate here, and so this will be an area of focus going forward. Addressing the telecommunications issues at Simsbury Farms in conjunction with the currently approved street lighting project. We've had numerous ongoing challenges with our telecommunications system due to our reliance on wireless connection up there, which has been inconsistent at best, and it's a customer service problem. It's a revenue producing problem. And just the inconsistency of it is really been I guess a point of contention for staff, for residents, and is something we really need to address as part of this project. Finally, complete the golf course renovations and evaluation for the replacement of the central irrigation system. As you know, we're currently have a renovation underway of really a major renovation of the fifth green, similar to what we had done a couple of years back on the second green. And again, this is a course that was designed 40 to 45 years ago when things were very different. And from a maintenance standpoint, from a playability standpoint, this is going to be a big improvement, for the course. And so the central irrigation system is really the lifeline of that facility. The last time it was done was in 1994, and a typical life expectancy is in that 20 to 30-year range. So we knew we were coming into this, and I know we'll talk about a little bit later. When this was a placeholder, we had a number of $100,000 on that, not knowing what it would entail. When Mike Wallace did a little more work on it, talked to some engineering firms and some firms that would come in and do this, we found that it was quite a bit less. So it will not be what we had initially thought it would be. That's not to say that the replacement of the irrigation system may be what we hope we hope it's what we have projected, but we'll find out when that study is done. Conduct a cost recovery analysis for the special revenue fund, and Maria, you may, I know we've had some conversations on this, but this has been an ongoing issue for us in terms of stabilizing, I would say, the special revenue fund. And this budget reflects a change from with an additional $10,000 being appropriated from the general fund to offset the deficit in the revenue fund. Part of this whole the analysis really to look at how we compensate and how we contract with people that provide our programs. And we have a great variety of contractual arrangements that we have. Some where we may have people on our own payroll, others which is a traditional manner amongst municipalities where we'll contract with a person and there'll be a revenue split with them. And some of those really vary widely. Certain contractors may have higher supply costs. They may take on more marketing costs themselves than what others do. So each one really needs to be looked at individually. It's one piece of getting the revenue fund, improving they're stabilizing it, I should say, and really reducing the deficit and trying to make it more balanced. Expanding program offerings for all ages and abilities. I really say, I don't know that it's necessarily an expansion, but it's often a refining. And our rec supervisor, one with John Tebow and Terrence Schrager, they're charged with really looking at the programs that we offer and revising them, refining them, seeing what the trends are in programming, what the public wants to see, and implementing those. So we may not be always expanding and adding, although I think sometimes that is, there's an opportunity for that, but it's certainly refining what we do, and so that will remain an area of focus. Budget highlights, general fund contribution increase of $36,000. Our general fund increase this year is $26,867 for the operating budget. Of that, $25,752 is for negotiated contractual salary increases. And I think what happened last year when the budget was approved, that the contract with our with the Park and Public Work Employees bargaining unit had not been settled. So that was not reflected in our budget anyway. So now we're actually catching up and getting that fully funded. And again, the special revenue fund will see a $10,000 increase to offset the subsidy that fund has. CNR funding to address major equipment needs for the ice rink and park open space maintenance. The two pieces of equipment that we've identified are two that are very, very vital to our operation. One is a 12-foot deck rotary mower, which is used on our, of the 40 athletic fields that we maintain, and that includes the Board of Ed athletic fields, probably 30 to 32 of those are maintained with that front-end rotary mower, as well as our open space areas and the Farmington Valley Greenway. So we basically have two that we keep operational, and so this is really one of them. And the other is the ice resurfacing unit, the Zamboni, as you may know it. And again, the current unit that we have was pre-owned. I believe it was a 1997 model. I've got it written down. So that will replace it. And this will be a pre-owned unit as well. We've had good experience with those, and we will. That's what our plans are to replace the current one with. The proposed budget maintains current level of services with emphasis on cost recovery analysis in the special revenue fund. I should mention, and although there's not a slide here that I include, I do have it in hand, that our total net per capita spending in Simsbury for park and recreation services remains the lowest of all comparable greater Hartford municipalities. Continue with trends and challenges, continue the maintenance improvements to the existing Farmington Valley Greenway infrastructure. The demand certainly for those trails remains high, and we're looking at adding I think a much needed and a piece that will certainly a great addition to the network of trails with the Simsbury Bloomfield grant. Initiating the RFP for the consultant to oversee the Park and Open Space Master Plan. Through solar power and natural gas conversion, seek to better control utility costs at the Simsbury Farms Recreation Complex. And just talk a little bit about that. Within the revenue fund, our utility cost is a big piece of that. And it seems like it's just gone in one direction. And it's further been a challenge that we face with the fund. It's anticipated those solar panels are going to go on the rink. This is through the project that Tom Roy initiated and saw through. And this is, I believe, with the stabilization of the electrical costs will go a long way in also stabilizing the revenue fund. Our electricity costs at the farms right now fluctuate anywhere between, I'm going to say, between $84,000 and $90,000 per year. So this is a big number when we're looking at the subsidy that the revenue fund has. And I think the fact that part of the agreement is it locks in for a long term gives us a little better, more assurance in our planning, and I think will be a great addition for us. The other one is the conversion to natural gas, and we've had actually 3 meetings in the last 2 months with Connecticut Natural Gas and with United Illuminating. Currently, their gas lines come right up to 5 Gates Lane, which is right at the southeast corner of the complex. So we've had conversations, I'm actually going back to 2001, about the feasibility of bringing those in versus using propane that we use now. Again, a large heating source and a large heating bill that we incur. They want to look at making it cost effective for them, and we understand that. But I think if in fact that can happen, it will do the same sort of thing that the solar panels will do. It'll give a much more stable projection on what those costs will be. Certainly cleaner, safer. I think just a lot of benefits. And the one thing that we found with propane is it just is very unpredictable in terms of the rates that we've paid. And when we see the scope of the bills that we pay, this I believe, and I can't sit here and say that, we don't know now what the savings would be, but it certainly would be more, it was with the panels, the rate is going to be a lot more predictable. And I think it will, again, one more piece of going towards stabilizing the revenue fund. Finally, utilizing all available media, continuing to market department programs and facilities to newcomers and potential users of all ages. And this is always a focus, but I think going back to all the new housing developments coming into town, we have all these new residents, and one of the constant discussions we have is, how do we get to these people and how do we make them aware of what we do? Once we have them, and once they're in our programs or in our system, they get all our information, and that's fine. It's just making them aware of what we are. I've visited on 2 or 3 occasions and dropped off literature on us down at Dorset Crossing and at Highcroft. Is it Highcroft up in Powder Forest? And they are very, very appreciative of it, and they're obviously still seeing new people coming in, most of which in all ages too. It's right across families and up to seniors. And so I think one of the things that we really need to do is to whether it's the old-fashioned handing them the brochure or the card that says, here's what we are and here's where you can contact us, or by utilizing social media, which we've made inroads there. I think we've had fairly good success. But I think really across all available media, we need to continue to really focus on that. Because we do find that there are still many people out there that frankly don't know, that we're here, exactly what we do. So that's really needs to be a continuing focus of ours.
Can I ask, what's the single place you'd direct people to learn more?
Well, we try and get them to our website. That's the easy one. And if we can, the easiest is just simsburyrec.com, go there. And from there, they can at least see, all our facilities, all our programs. That's the easy, and also we include all our affiliated organizations in town. So someone comes to town and they have a child who's interested in soccer or, lacrosse or whatever. We have all those contact people. We keep the website updated. So it may not be something that we have, but there's a good chance people come that there's what they're interested in. We at least can provide the contact information from. So, finally, again, CNR projects. I talk a little bit about that. The first one, the front end rotary mower replaces a 2003 unit with 4,287 hours on it. That's an equivalent roughly of in the 150 to 160,000 miles where we make a comparison to one of our vehicles. In the ice rink resurfacing machine, again, heavily used, replacing a 1997 unit with 4,666 hours, pre-owned and as the replacement would be as well. CNR, again, continuing CNR project, that the irrigation system feasibility study went from as a capital project to a CNR project. Again, really to study the current system, what we're looking at is a replacement cost, and give us a project number in terms of what that will be. Greenway improvements, these are improvements to the existing greenway system, including resurfacing, fence replacement, signage, pavement markings, and related work. Many of our segments are now at or past the 20-year lifespan, so we are looking at it more probably wholesale replacement versus just, really minor improvements. These are some of the segments, and again, one of the great things about our system is that it's a tree-lined route, a lot of benefits to it, but with that comes the root intrusion and the other challenges that creates. So, Jeff and Tom Roy and I have spoken about that. We actually went from end to end on the trail last year, tried to come up with a sequence of areas that needed to be improvement. The first one, which was the highest priority, was a segment from Route 315 to Wolcott Road, which is, I think, made a huge difference. I don't know that we have any that are that severe, but nonetheless, there'll be some that will come along that we don't want to get to that point either. So that's all I have. I would like to also mention, I know every year I do come in and talk about the importance of updating our equipment and our vehicles, and while we're not requesting any vehicles this year, I should mention in 2013, our average vehicle, and by and large, these are trucks that we use for whether it be park maintenance, but a large part of it is snow plowing too. They're all plowing vehicles. Our average vehicle had 83,161 miles. And through the continual replacement, we're down at 30,491. So certainly a huge difference. And, as Nick said, about the police cars, those miles are not like miles on our cars. And the miles on our trucks are not like the miles on our cars either. Those are some hard miles. So not only are our repair and equipment replacement costs coming down, far better condition for our guys to work in. So I want to thank you, for that. And I've been probably a broken record in some respects, but it's made a huge difference for us. And I just want to finish with that. So I'll be glad to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Any questions?
I was just sharing with the new board members that we bought you half a truck one year, so we had.
I love that half a
It was
truck.
better than that.
That's why the mileage got cut.
Yeah,
Yeah.
still doing that.
Much better to be in the front seat than the back seat.
I
though.
did warn Tom Roy this morning when he had to go. I said, you might only get half a plow by the time the day's over, so.
Quick question, Jerry, on the irrigation system, the 1994, you said, was that 100% replacement?
Yes.
1994?
Yes.
And are you guys, you folks, experiencing, right now, are you just planning for what would be the expected end of life, or are you seeing accelerated incidents of blowouts and replacements where you're diverting
Yeah.
personnel to fix throughout the
Probably
year?
some of both. We know the life expectancy of it, but we have experienced, increasing breaks and some of it, one of the things that, there are a lot of contributing factors, one of which is your soil conditions, because the movement that you get with the frost and the heaving, and we don't have great soils up there, so there's an inconsistency there that I think contributes to some of the breaks, but we are experiencing more breaks out there, and it's probably, consistent with the system reaching at the end of its.
But we're adequately dealing with those. We have the.
Oh, yeah, it's
staff
just when
competency,
it's we address it, but when you think about it, we don't have a large staff to begin with. So and basically, usually the guys that are doing that are full-timers, one of our four. So when you devote one of those to, and typically it's two guys that do it, it's not just one. So those are two people that you're taking away from, other work that you have. And this is just to, to keep that area, operational. I would say there's probably peripheral sorts of effects that it has. And but to answer your question, we are seeing more breaks out
Just,
there.
again, just for education, you mentioned earlier about the number of fields you're responsible for, athletic fields and all. Has that number increased and decreased at all in the last, let's say, 10 years? Have we brought more on or taken out, decommissioned some at all? Or that been steady?
I'm going to say it's probably remained fairly stable in the last 10 years. I know we added in working with the soccer club, we added a field over at Curtis Park. By and large, I think we have tried, and some of the groups are looking for, have expressed interest in seeing more fields. I think the other thing, the conversation that needs to also happen with them is, are you scheduling them in an optimal manner? Are you getting the most efficient use of the fields that we provide? And that's something that, I think needs to be discussed. We have limited resources to maintain them, and I think they need to understand that their scheduling has to really reflect that. The Board of Ed has been tremendously cooperative with making their fields available to our youth organizations, and so they benefit from that. But I think that they all need to understand, and we have that discussion, that the scheduling and the efficiency of that needs to be a steady focus.
Any other questions?
Yeah,
Chris?
Jerry, when you talk about potentially contracting with a program manager, what do they tend to do differently? Are they marketing more? Are they adding more programs, making sure the programs are more cost-effective? What tends to be the catalyst that really justifies that?
I should have been more clear on that, Chris. They're really, when I talk about contract, they're really for individual programs. So, for example, we run an acting program, okay? And we will go out and seek someone who runs that, and we'll say, okay, we're going to run this acting program. What do you need? What type of return do you need to get on that? And they'll basically say, well, for every kid that's in there, I need so many dollars, or, that's usually how they arrive at it. And out of that, they'll say, here are my costs. And so we'll say, okay, we need a return to reflect our overhead and our marketing and our handling the registration. So we'll say, here's what we need to put on top of that, so you understand it. And that's typically how we come about it. Now, it will vary greatly among those contractors. Say a fellow comes in and is going to run an arts program. Well, he may be supplying, say, art supplies that need to be taken into consideration when you're coming up with that revenue split. Or another guy may take on some of the marketing expense on his own, in addition to what we do, to try and get more people in it. Maybe they will help. They may take registration from their own system along with us. So there's a number of factors that go into it, and it's not a one size fits all.
Sure.
But I think what we need to do is make sure that we're getting, we want them to be successful, and I think by and large we've made sure that they are. But we need to make sure that we are too, and that we're getting the best return that we can get. So that's going to be I've had some discussions already with some vendors, and I think as it goes forward, every one of them that conversation needs to take place. It really does.
Thanks.
I just want to thank you for your support of expanding open gym time for persons with intellectual disabilities and autism. That's great. And I know that the people who are taking advantage of that greatly appreciate it. I was wondering if there are any other opportunities that might be available to expand programming for that population, and can we use that as a way to make people more aware of all the services that you do provide? Because I think, as I listen to you talk about, acting and art and everything, a lot of people don't connect that with the pool and the golf course. Those tend to be the things that people focus on.
Yeah.
But there's so much more available.
Well, sure. I will say I'm glad that we were able to get that started. And Cheryl's referring, we run an open gym program through the winter that we run at Henry James Junior High. And basically what we did was to dedicate an hour where children, adults, and families of those with autism come in and really have the gym to themselves for an hour time. And they're welcome to, certainly to stay and play as long as they want with, the public would be there too. And I think the response has been good. I've talked to some of the families that have come. They appreciated it very much. The one thing that one commented was that they're in other programs too. Some are in Special Olympics. That the timing may not be perfect. Sundays is probably a busy day, and so, but it was a good start. And I think, to answer your question, I think there is the opportunity for more. I think our focus was always, and we go back, I think I'm not saying we led the way, but I think we were always very aggressive in trying to make sure that our programs were inclusive.
Right, which is great.
And we've, and John has put a tremendous amount of energy in Taryn and her predecessors and all of us. But to your point, I think there also is the opportunity and maybe the need to set some time aside and for just that population. And I think this was a case that it worked really well. So I think we work closely with Favar on this too.
Right.
And they're certainly the logical one for us to, to continue to work with. So I think that it certainly is, it should continue, yeah.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you very much.
Not at all, thank
I
you.
appreciate it. So I think we're actually at a really good point to take a 10-minute stretch, and then I think we can follow the agenda as it's presented from here on out. Good. So let's come back in about 10 minutes after 2. Thanks.